Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I have with me the awesome Abby Martin. You guys know who she is, but Abby, please tell everyone hello and tell the audience who you are.
Hey, what's up? I'm Abby Martin. I'm an artist, activist, host of the Empire Files on Telesur. Everyone check it out. I just am a vehement anti-imperialist journalist. So I use that to basically channel all of my coverage from everything that I do with that lens. So my show, The Empire Files, basically looks at the world in the context of how empires and colonizers have shaped and provided context to basically the geopolitical situation that we're looking at today.
How did you become you on this? Like, I guess this question is some degree. How did you wake up? You and I'm using a terminology because people have been using that terminology, but I think that terminology sums it up really well. Like you say, you look at the world with a certain lens, this kind of anti-imperialist lens. That's not the normal lens. If that makes sense.
Certainly not. No, we're one of the most indoctrinated countries in the world. We're told the opposite, of what we project, or no, we're told what we project around the world, but we both know that that's the opposite of the reality in this country. We're actually the worst democracy in the Western world. We're the least free in a lot of ways. We have the worst press. I think I woke up, if there's a pinnacle moment that I can really point to, it was when the Iraq War was being sold to us. We were already in Afghanistan. It was post 9/11 hysteria had swept us all in this propaganda matrix. And all of a sudden the media just switched, Jamal. And I was just so confused. I thought, why is the media all of a sudden talking about Saddam Hussein if nothing happened?
Yeah.
But it took me still a really long time to go from being kind of sympathetic to Ron Paul to getting to that economic philosophy to now where, I'm more socialist minded today. But anti-imperialism and anti-war always drove my ideology in politics. It was just a long journey to get from there to where I am today, to kind of understanding the root of imperialism and how capitalism really drives this global system.
Who was your person? So for me, there were a few people. Richard Wolff was one of the people for me where I was like, yeah, this guy's right. But right in a way where he's explaining a point of view, if that makes sense. It's like it's a lesson per se, but it's also a point of view of trying to understand and looking at the world. Jack Fresco was another one of those people. And I'm mentioning Fresco because I've seen you give lectures at the Venus Foundation, which also I was like, holy shit, that's awesome. But who was the person for you? Like that to kind of put those pieces together? Because look, I look at the world and say, for the most part, there's a part of a person that's a person, meaning there's this kind of a ghost in the machine of sorts. But that's always pushing up against or learning and growing through the experiences of the person comes in contact with, either implicit or explicit. So I always assume that whatever's in a person, either it comes from outside of that person in order to, for that person to respond to. Who are the people, or what were, I know you said the Iraq War, but is there somebody that put it in perspective for you in a way that made the puzzle pieces fit, if that makes sense? I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that, because it wasn't necessarily an ideology as it was just kind of packaging what our military has done. So I remember reading Chalmers Johnson's book Blowback when I was a freshman in college.
Awesome.
And I was just like,
it's awesome.
Holy shit.
Yeah, his lectures are awesome. He's on, you can find him on YouTube.
Just that case study of what we've done in Okinawa, I was like, if this is what we've done just to Okinawa, what the hell else don't I know? And that was really the beginning of my journey. But I would say another giant help was Peter Joseph. I mean, the Zeitgeist trilogy, going to moving forward, talking about just the capabilities and highlighting Jack Fresco's work in the Venus Project and really showing this is what we could do. Unfortunately, the best most intelligent people in the world are focusing on how to kill people more efficiently, right? On death and destruction, instead of building these amazing technological advancements that really could advance society millennia.
Yeah, we don't have an issue of it's like Marvel, the superhero movie. I find these
Infinity War was awesome.
Oh yeah, I find these awesome these awesome little allegories within superheroes and whimsical things. But Thanos.
Yeah.
Thanos has this glove. He has absolute control of space, matter, and time. And the best thing he can find is to destroy half of the universe. You have absolute control over space, matter, and time. The thing is, I think they're making this kind of point of technology. Like, so with the capitalistic system, technology, for the most part, has a capacity to free humanity. You literally have all the resources you need to provide anything for everybody on this planet, all the world over. And like Thanos, we come with this idea of a few are going to have a huge amount and other people are going to have little of none. I think that seems to be the kind of philosophical way that we work. That's such an odd way of going about our affairs.
Oh my God, it's batshit crazy. It makes no sense. I mean, we have more than enough to feed the world 5 times over. We know that. It's not about how much we can afford. It's about what interests basically lie with the system. And we know what interests those are and what interests they're protecting. I mean, at the top, we know that everyone would have free healthcare. We could have a house there's 6 houses for every homeless person right now. I mean, we live in a system that's no longer based on scarcity. It's based on overproduction.
Yeah.
The booms and busts that are built in capitalism. And every time there's a bust, we know what happens. It's the top 1% that basically steals all the wealth. I mean, the last economic recession, the top 1% took 85%, I think, or more of all the wealth generated from whatever the recovery was. So this is built into the system. This is actually on purpose to continue to exacerbate the inequality that we're going to see get a lot worse if we don't have massive wealth redistribution.
Well, under Obama, 95% went to the top 1%.
Mm-hmm.
That's damning. Think about that. That guy's supposed to be the lefty president. 95% of the wealth.
And we should be, back to your point about automation, we should be embracing automation, freeing us up, embracing technology, freeing us up from jobs that we don't need, these menial jobs. But unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing automation basically because we don't have, a UBI, we don't have a universal basic income, we don't have any sort of social safety net. So people have to keep working these jobs, but that's just the inevitability of the system. We're going to see automation basically lose thousands of more jobs. So what's going to happen for those people who aren't going to have anything once those jobs are basically automated? And we're not looking forward enough.
And that terrifies me to some degree because I realize this is an issue of perspective. Like all of this literally is an issue of perspective. Like, because you're right. We have this odd situation where instead of saying human beings are amazing creatures, and I don't want those creatures flipping French fries or flipping hamburgers. I don't want them driving a taxi cab. If there's a car, they can drive their taxi cab better just because they need a job. How do you get people to realize that? Like, because to me, that seems to be one of the most straightforward things in the world for a society to say, let's make sure we have the things that we need. But that's not really how we do it. What's the trigger? There was something that woke you up where you were like, holy shit, this isn't working well. What is the trigger for other people? Because if we don't find that trigger for other people, just for one example, taxis. Like you have a situation where Uber right now is talking about automating those cars. Now, that's a good thing. People shouldn't be driving around in those cars. But all of the taxi cab drivers across the United States are going to lose their jobs within the next 10 years. All of the Uber drivers, all the Lyft drivers, these people are already on this kind of service economy where they're running pillar to post just barely to make ends meet. They're going to lose their jobs. And they're going to lose it because you have a piece of technology that does the job better, for cheaper, for longer. I wish society could realize, it's like technology is your way out. The problem is how we perceive it.
Right. You're dead on, Jamarl. And I think that the main thing is empathy. It's having humanity for the poor person on the street, a child suffering in Yemen. I mean, just this American exceptionalism and this ethnocentrist lens that we look at the rest of the world. And the fact that we're conditioned into thinking that we're actually fucking better than other human beings, that's a sickness. That is a sickness that is so pervasive and toxic in this country. And I really do think that's why we have so many bizarre, unique phenomenon to the society, because we're all empire babies growing up thinking that we're actually superior than human beings. I mean, how sick is that, Jamarl? So of course it needs to start there. It needs to start with you actually understanding with an internationalist lens at the world, understanding that all human beings are our brothers and sisters, and all of their suffering is on our shoulders, especially as an American citizen, to actually be removed from that when our tax dollars are literally sponsoring the suffering of, you know, Palestinians under apartheid settler colonial occupation state. Or you can look at the Yemen genocidal blockade, where 3 times as many people that died in the Holocaust could potentially starve to death by the end of this year. That's the reality. So unless we wake up to what we're doing with our tax dollars, we're in for a really, really, really long road ahead tomorrow, and it really scares me. And I don't know what it's going to take. If Trump hasn't woken everyone up now, what the hell will? I mean, the reptile brain is like activated with everyone, where people are, you know, living mass hallucinations where it's Russia, 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 or the Trump MAGA chuds. And I'm just like, wake up, man. Nothing's going to change.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because this gets to this thing of media. And I always get annoyed with media. I always think, are they corrupt or are they incompetent? And I don't necessarily know which one, but I think you kind of hit upon it. This idea of American exceptionalism. Do you think that's the thing that corrupts the media's lens? Like when media looks at the world, media just kind of assumes that they don't assume bad intent on our part. Like, you know, Donald Trump fires a missile off at Syria after a chemical strike where they don't even know who did it. And the media has attacked Donald Trump for the entire year. But in this moment, when he is doing something illegal, they say, this is the moment where he seems presidential. That is an amazing thing. Like they literally, like I watched, I think it was Brian Williams.
They're almost crying.
Yeah. He was fetishizing over this. He was like, you know, I'm blinded by the light of my missiles.
Yeah.
And nobody
Cohen.
Is this legal? You know, it's a basic question. Is it legal? Should the president be doing this?
Right. Before an investigation, or we even know that a chemical attack happened and we're already just launching hellfire missiles, there's something extremely wrong with that when you have a media apparatus that's cheering that on. And look at these panels on these media outlets. I mean, there's literally defense contractors and former Bush administration officials telling us why they're the resistance. Look, the media is a weapon. It is a weapon of the empire, and it is used as an extension of the state to essentially protect capitalism and empire, and to propagandize the American public, of course, to manufacture consent for these policies. So it works hand in glove. I think that, you know, it would be kind of cartoonish to paint all of media as like some big conspiracy where everyone's in on it. I think it's more to your point, where they are handpicked and they are put in these positions precisely because they won't ask those questions, precisely because they think America is better than other countries, and they have that moral platitude to basically justify and normalize these atrocities that are conducted in our name. So it's part of the course. Someone like Larry King, for example, he's precisely where he is today because he's never asked the right or the questions that Howard doesn't like, if you get what I'm saying.
That's hilarious. He's where he is because he doesn't ask the right question.
It's like he's failing upward. Bad question at a time. That's awesome. That's awesome. But I think you're right on that point, where media kind of is used as a weapon in this kind of propaganda tool in order to indoctrinate the public to a certain belief system, or even, like you say, handpicking people because you know that those people are not going to say certain things. Meaning, it's not so much that they're overtly corrupt. Exactly. It's just they have a certain disposition.
Exactly. It's like they get into these positions already having that worldview and ideology. So it's not like they're going to be going up bucking their editorial, you know, control and saying, "Oh, I'm really passionate about this issue. I want to get out there." No, they've been conditioned at journalism school to be that objective journalist where you got to get both sides of the story. You got to get the government press release and you got to get Monsanto's side before you talk about how they're poisoning the fucking planet. But on top of that, it's telling us who's our friend and foe when it comes to the international arena, which I find really horrifying because it works, Jamarl. I mean, the uniformity.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, Venezuela, Syria, Iran. It's like it's just marching orders and this uniform wall-to-wall propaganda that really, really does work.
You know, Howard Zinn has this awesome quote talking about you can't be neutral on a moving bus. Like making a point that, you know, when you're looking at something like Israel and Palestine, and you have one side that has nuclear weapons, and you have another side that has rocks. You know, it's like, and you're like, you know, here's a conflict between these two things. It's like, well, there's not really a conflict when one side has nuclear weapons and the other side doesn't. And one side is essentially murdering, you know, 100 people and the other side has 0. It's like these, like it's like looking at these issue and trying to look at this particular issue as quote unquote balance when this is the scales that you have. There is no such thing as objectivity. Ultimately, you have a certain bias towards humanism or you have a certain bias towards power. You make your choice.
Exactly. The objectivity is bullshit. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I don't need to couch my objectivity in neoliberal think tanks and government officials who are anonymous, planting stories. Every journalist has an opinion. They just basically hide their opinion in other experts' analysis, right? And who are these experts? Well, they're the same warmongers and intelligence officials in DC that use these journalists to promote their agenda. It's very obvious, especially having lived in DC. I know exactly how the game works, and it really does come down to access, where these journalists just want a ticket to the next White House Correspondents' Dinner. I mean, look no further than Shane Smith at Vice. I mean, Vice is painted as this anti-establishment, a hard-hitting, like super cutting-edge journalism, and then you have Shane Smith laying down like a fucking carpet for Netanyahu, basically just stroking his balls the whole time. I mean, it was unbelievably insulting that you're asking someone who just oversaw one of the most egregious massacres in human history of unarmed protesters, and you're just letting him spout Hamas did this to themselves. So that's the state of where we are. The access means everything.
That's sad. That's one of those things that I learned this year from doing my channel. That wasn't something that I fully realized until I started doing my channel and started paying more attention to news. The one case that I saw that woke me up immediately, Jake Tapper and what is her name? Tulsi Gabbard. Mm-hmm. Tulsi Gabbard goes to Syria, because she wants to see it for herself. She's like, I am not getting the real story. I want to see what's taking place for myself. And she goes. Jake Tapper hits her in the knees, one case after the next, talking about, oh my God, you didn't talk to the Assad butcher, and then moves on using this kind of media trick where she hits him in the knees, not allowing her to answer that particular point, and then moves on to the next thing. Tulsi Gabbard said, we're paying terrorists, and they want us to stop paying terrorists. Jake Tapper reflexively, the government says they're not doing that. I was like, well, wait a minute. Does Jake Tapper know that or not? Now, if Jake Tapper knows it, that means Jake Tapper knows something and he's not telling the public itself. Whereas he's reflexively spouting the government's position, which is, to your point, this thing of sometimes they know this stuff and they're reflexively talking to the government's position without necessarily giving a larger contextual view of the world. And I agree with you that this kind of American exceptionalism to some degree leads to wars. Like, if I don't know the other perspective, like one example, just South China Sea, the China thing. You can read CNN. CNN spouts all of these experts, and there's like, America said China is getting militaristic. It's like, what? China is getting militaristic? It's like, maybe, but look who's talking. It's a certain disposition, I guess, that creates this condition for war when the public doesn't quite understand the other side of the story.
Oh my God. I mean, Jake Tapper is the worst. He's horrible on Palestine. I mean, even, God, where do I even start?
And I want to talk to you about that. You were there. And your story, and that's one of the things I definitely want to get to. Your story, you did a story with Max Blumenthal. Max Blumenthal is awesome himself. And apparently you guys were worshiping Satan and eating babies. And it was so bad that it broke laws and they didn't allow it to be shown in 28 countries.
Yep.
That's amazing. You guys need to stop burning, eating babies on those videos. No, seriously, what happened? You guys did a video and they blocked it in 28 countries, including the UK, France, and apparently the United States.
Yes. So Max obviously is controversial in his own right. Israel hates me. They blocked me from going into Gaza. They have called me a propagandist, not a journalist. They've unleashed tens of thousands of dollars to smear me.
Wow.
Done huge campaigns to try to, basically tarnish my name. So that's that. So I wasn't like a stranger to this whole apparatus, this Hasbara, propaganda apparatus that they try to really crush any sort of dissident. But it was very surprising how YouTube simply acquiesces to this, because this wasn't the first time. Max has told me that he's also had videos restricted. There was also a video that we did where we interviewed just a bunch of Israelis and did man on the streets in Tel Aviv, or I'm sorry, in Jerusalem. And that was also restricted because it said it was sensitive or offensive content. So that's the thing. When you have tens of millions of dollars behind you, you can really unleash a campaign to mass report something, or, you know, basically just take something down. And I think that's what you see time and again with these videos, whether it be Facebook or on YouTube. And this video that you're speaking of was simply an interview with Max talking about his book, The 51-Day War, where in 2014, Israel just unleashed a horrific bloodletting in Gaza, where they massacred 500 children and just relentlessly bombed for weeks and weeks. We just simply talked about that, and Max was talking about, you know, the tactics that Israeli military officials use on protesters, whether it be bashing their knees, breaking the bones, the rocks, putting people in jail for 20 years for throwing rocks, shoot to cripple. So understanding these tactics and talking about them, I think, just exposes them a lot, exposes them for who they are, especially in light of this massacre that's going on when they are on camera executing people who are unarmed using these tactics. And so, yeah, I mean, the video was restricted, and it still is, Jamal. It's fascinating how these Silicon Valley corporations just completely bend over backwards to the will of states without any law.
It's amazing to me. And it's one of those things where if it's that horrendous where you guys are just talking about something, maybe the issue is not so much that you guys are talking about it. Maybe it's the thing you're actually talking about. Like, it's almost like ag gag laws, where people come in and they show what they're doing to animals. And then it's like, hey, buddy, you were putting you in jail because you expose what we're doing to these animals. It's kind of the same thing with the human beings. It's like you're having a conversation about what's taking place in Palestine, and it is atrocious and it is disastrous, especially from the standpoint of humanity. It's grossly immoral. And YouTube looks at this, and to some degree, the whole banning the thing, to some degree, gets across that you are right, that yes, this is immoral. But they kind of miss the point that the thing that's immoral is the thing that you're talking about. It's the situation, not the very fact that you're talking about it. It's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I've been to Israel. I've been to Palestine, certain areas of Bethlehem. I've ended up in conversations with Israeli soldiers, and it's an interesting dynamic. Let me say it this way: it's an interesting dynamic. I've talked to Palestinians, and I met this woman who was Belgian Palestinian. She was extremely aggressive. The woman was amazing. And I found myself like, whoa, you're a little too aggressive. And talking to the Israeli soldiers, like, whoa, you're kind of missing the point, buddy. Like, you're not necessarily taking fully into account the things that you guys are doing in this country. You're occupying their land. This was before I was even kind of politically aware of this. What were the comments from the Israelis? Because it's interesting. He was extremely defensive initially. And then when he realized I wasn't necessarily attacking him, he was like, you're right. There's some things that we do that people could take a particular way. And I kind of understand it. I lived in those areas. I can see where people are coming from. I was like, yes, you're a human being. Yeah. You can understand. You can see things that are taking place that are bad. And he just kind of has this edge on top of him where he's like, oh, people are attacking me. I don't want to deal with it. What was your experience on this? You were there. You had the opportunity to talk to people. Apparently, again, eating babies that YouTube didn't particularly like. What was the conversations that you had with Palestinians, and what were the conversations you had with Israelis? And one point to this: were the Palestinians to the point where these blood rage maniacs that Israelis make them out to be, that just runs like zombies to gates to be shot? Or were they people who understood their land was being occupied and they wanted their land back? Or somewhere in between?
First, the whole concept of having a settler colonial state necessitates a certain kind of racism and bigotry and xenophobia in a way in order to justify that. That system alone. Maintaining a system of apartheid and also continuing to atomize the land that is left for whatever should have been the future Palestinian state. So we're talking about illegal settlements that are constantly on a daily basis encroaching and eating up the remaining land that was left. That's happening. That's an active settler colonial thing that's happening right now. So the majority of Israelis look, they grow up conditioned to think that this is, you know, their ordained right to have this land, and you can argue all day religiously whatever's in the Bible or whatnot. I like to look at reality in an objective way, and not look at, you know, mythical text from 4,000 years ago that justifies brutal atrocities today.
Yeah.
Look, it's very obvious, and we're told that this is a situation that's very complicated, right? The fight's been going on for thousands of years. They just can't coexist. That's absolutely absurdly wrong.
Yeah,
this is a state that was created on top of an indigenous population. And in order to maintain a settler colonial state, you need to constantly expunge and expel the indigenous population. And that is still going on, and that was never not going on. I mean, from the foundation of Israel to today, the prime minister, Ben Gurion, and all the militias that expelled and did the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians during the Nakba said in documents, they said, the land is overrun with Arabs. We need to kick them all out. And they did that in a very violent way, which is why there's hundreds of thousands of refugees, 1.3 million of which are living in Gaza today, trapped behind a fence. I was banned from Gaza, but I was able to spend a month in the West Bank, and I did interview hundreds of Palestinians, and they were, just like you said, Jamal, these are human beings. These are human beings, and they have hearts as big as the world. I mean, they open their hearts to you, they open their homes to you, they open their soul, and they just bear it. They bear their soul. We went into funerals. I was around wailing women who had just lost family members from troops. I ate dinner at I heard horror stories. Every Palestinian has a horror story. Because when you're on that side of the conflict, you are constantly being brutalized and harassed and subjugated. So everyone had a horror story. But I did not hear one person say anything negative or defamatory or racist against Jewish people. All I heard, one guy said, I don't care. He said they can be here. He said, please, just why do you have to take my house? Why do you have to move right next to me? Why do you have to move right on top of me? He just said, I don't care. Let's be neighbors, just like we were before Israel was founded. Just like Jews and Muslims always coexisted, plus Christians. You know, the birth of Christ, but Bethlehem. This was a sacred place for so many religions, and so why should it be exclusive to this one religion at the expense of millions and millions of people? And to the contrary, I didn't know what to expect when I went into Jerusalem proper and Tel Aviv, but I was really, really alarmed. I mean, we're talking about a country that was created in a socialist lens, this kibbutz project that was a haven for refugees from the Holocaust. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. Unfortunately, it's turned fascist. Again, to maintain this kind of apartheid system, you have to basically have cultivated the majority of your society to have accepted the state of occupation, right? And to have accepted that these people are lesser than, and have externalized the other, and have basically externalized all the abuse and justified it to a certain extent. So I was very alarmed at the response from a lot of Israelis. And I kind of did what you did, Jamal. I just asked them very basic questions. I didn't antagonize them, and I didn't confront them. I just simply let them talk. And you'd see a lot of that sentiment is reflected in polls across the country where the majority actually said very genocidal things. It was really unfortunate. Not only genocidal things, but the people who did call themselves leftists or progressives said, the occupation is still needed, although it should be more humane. And I said, is leftist a slur? And they said, leftist is a slur here. My friend Dan Cohen and David Sheen, who are, they're Jewish. They were living in Israel. David Sheen's an Israeli Jew. Dan is an American Jew, but he was living there, and he was filming, because Israel paints itself as this liberal democracy. Obviously, that's how it survives, who's being attacked and threatened by all these Arab states around it. Well, they expose the real state of Israel. And they have shown these tens of thousands of people in the streets of Tel Aviv that would be equatable to maybe filling up Times Square in New York, of people chanting, death to the Arabs, death to the leftists, death to the videographers who film the atrocities that the IDF commits. And there's actually a phrase from the more racist elements of Israeli society saying leftists are the AIDS and Arabs are the common cold. You can't get rid of the common cold unless you get rid of AIDS, because leftists are going to be the roadblock for the total solution, which is the mass expulsion and basically just ethnic cleansing of all Palestinians from the land. It's really unfortunate. And again, I wish it weren't true. It took me going there to accept that the two-state solution is not possible because the land has been atomized, and also that there is no hope from within. Of course there are leftists, of course there's progressive Israelis. The problem is there's not enough of them to change society from within. Just like there wasn't enough anti-racist South Africans to make apartheid collapse. I mean, it had to come externally, and that's why BDS is so crucial for us to act outside to apply that pressure economically, culturally, and in every other way, financially, you know?
That is disturbing. Wow, that is so disturbing. I mean, look, it's one of those things where I look at American history, and from my own disposition as being African American, part Native American, you can say that there's a commonality between America and Israel from the standpoint of the United States
Absolutely
committing a certain genocide, taking the land from Native Americans.
Absolutely.
And what's taking place in Israel now being this kind of open air ghetto where they consistently take the land against international law,
right,
being protected by the United States and Western journalists. Like recently, when there were the missile launch, then Israel comes out and says, Iran launched missiles at us.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, this was pretty amazing, seeing as Israel had been attacking Iran for the last month. Literally just roughshod. Iran hasn't attacked Israel at all. And the media comes out and says, oh my God, Iran has attacked Israel. Iran has attacked Israel. What are we going to do? Iran has attacked Israel. And you look at the source, all the sources are Israeli sources. Like, and you have other sources who say, no, it wasn't Iran that attacked you. It was Syria that attacked you. But there was no way to get the actual story because all of the media just ran with one case. And to make a point of what you're saying, the shooting, like the crippling and the hobbling and everything else, the recent attacks, 100 and something people that they murdered out here, the people who were protesting, the shooting, 2,200, many of which were babies, brave Israeli soldiers, killing dangerous babies in tents. The wild part about this is they were shooting people in the knees, in the groin, just like you said, this hobbling, in some cases shooting people in the head, shooting people who were for the press.
They shot 500 people in the head.
Yeah, 500 people in the head. Going after people who were in the press. Shot that woman who was literally trying to assist. I can't think of her name. Yeah, I mean, if this was any other country, the United States would have bombed the country by now. I mean, there is something dramatically problematic with the way a country does this with impunity. And to have the guy tweet from the IDF that we know where all of these bullets landed, everybody did a great job, essentially murdering a lot of people and, hobbling a lot of people. I don't know how you change that. I mean, ultimately, because what I'm stuck with is the same forces that made Abby Martin are fundamentally the same forces that made these people. And what I mean by that is not so much that you guys had the same experiences, but the idea that experience itself is cultivating particular personalities. And you have a society that's kind of enshrined a particular thought that allows the society to persist the way the society is. How on earth do you get past something like that when the whole modus operandi of the society and the way the society even thinks about itself is being ingrained to the youth up until the point where the people are older and being hardened by this kind of militaristic thing where all of these people join the military because all of these people think they're threats on their corners. I mean, think about us. The United States, the propaganda arm of the media in the United States tells us where freedom and justice and anything that we're doing in the world is for good ends. If we're destroying Iraq, we didn't do it for bad ends. We just did it because we made a mistake. If we're paying terrorists in Syria, we're not doing it for bad ends. We're just paying moderates. These people are really good and they're going to, bring peace and joy when they take over Syria and, the bloodthirsty terrorists. I mean, the people in the country believe it. Like they don't look below the surface. So if I'm seeing a country where they can actually come up with some kind of credible military threat, saying that there's something beyond us that's trying to get us, forget the fact that Saudi Arabia and Israel have been working in cahoots together. The guy from Saudi Arabia said he doesn't care about the Palestinian cause. I guess I'm making the point that the country itself has hardened a particular belief system, and it is hardened that belief system using this idea of threats abroad in the same way that the United States uses this idea of terrorism, and having the media kind of harden this idea that we need to spend $1 trillion on the military. They do the same thing there, and they do this from the cradle to the grave in this kind of permanent way. I don't know how you change that.
You can't, Jamal, which is why we need to focus on ending the U.S. empire, because without the U.S. empire, Israel would collapse and fold in on itself in a day. We just saw Nikki Haley at the UN Security Council literally begging. She's fucking psychotic. She's a rabid fucking psycho. She's at the UN Security Council going around begging the members to vote for a resolution that she created out of thin air, saying, no, I'm Hamas did all of this. Hamas. And so she's going around being, please vote for this. And everyone was like, you know what? No, because that's absolutely insane. And I really feel like a turning point has been reached with Israel. So again, it does not matter ultimately what Israelis think, because it's not going to, the change is not going to come from them. But then you have to widen that scope and say, okay, can change happen just with BDS as long as the U.S. empire is giving $10 million to Israel every day? Mind you, this is a country that has no single payer health care here, and we are subsidizing an apartheid state with $10 million a day. So I think that's why I focus, on Saudi Arabia, Israel, because I'm funding those atrocities with my tax dollars, but also the main focus is the U.S. empire, because this is what is the root of all of these atrocities and all of the global subjugation. It all stems from the dominant empire, with 800 military bases around the world, military personnel in almost every country that has basically undermined the democratic processes of countless countries around the world. I focus on ending the source of the misery and suffering, because without the U.S. empire falling, Israel will continue to be propped up, and especially under Trump. Trump just gave a green light to Netanyahu. I mean, all of this shit's been ramped up to the nth degree, because they know that there is no line that they can't cross. They can do whatever they want. That's what they just showed us with this latest massacre. They can get away with anything, and they're not going to stop.
I mean, Abby, that was before.
Oh,
I mean, even when they killed those 2,200 people, I think it was 80% were civilians. 80%. There's a documentary called Breaking the Set, and it goes into this thing of soldiers, or Breaking the Silence. I'm sorry.
Breaking the Silence, yep.
Breaking the Set is yours. Breaking the Silence. Well, it goes into this thing where the soldiers themselves are talking about some of the things, the orders that they were given, like dropping dumb bombs on these areas that are packed. Shoot, if anybody's in this particular area, shoot, because there should be no civilians in this area at all. So everybody's fair game. I mean, some insane stuff. Okay, moving from that for the moment.
Yeah.
Venezuela. That was the other thing that I was interested in. I bring people on the show who I'm interested in talking to because they have access that I don't. You're one of those people. Venezuela. Now, I remember, it's within my political memory, Hugo Chavez to a certain degree. Now, the only thing I remember of Hugo Chavez at this point is the propaganda that's dumped into me about Hugo Chavez.
Right.
This was before our political awareness. And I believed that everything that people told me. And when I went to the doctor, I believed that everything could be solved with a shot and a lollipop, and the world would be great. And there's gold at the end of the rainbow. That's what I was told. So that's what I expected. And then you grow up and you're like, God damn it, doctors can't heal everything. There's no goddamn gold at the end of the rainbow. Yeah, there's no gold here. And Hugo Chavez, was supposedly a bad guy. Now, I started listening to certain people like George Galloway, and Galloway is making a point. No, this guy has won multiple elections. And once you start looking at it, not from the perspective of the United States, Robert McNamara, one of those people who was within my political awareness, who woke me up also to a certain degree, was Robert McNamara. And one of the things, his movie, he talked about looking at reality from other people's perspective, from the standpoint of countries, like the Vietnam War. And specifically, if you looked at it from the standpoint of Vietnam had just come from this colonial power of France, and it assumed that the United States was taken over as a colonial power. And if the United States would have just thought about it from one moment, from the perspective of the Vietnamese, there will be 2 million more Vietnamese living here right now. There will be thousands more Americans. Same thing here with Venezuela, where we look at these countries in South America, and the United States is run roughshod over a lot of those countries. And in running roughshod those countries, at some point, I would imagine you get a Hugo Chavez, and he is this kind of socialist, I guess you can call it revolt or something. The United States hates his guts. Hates his guts. It was even responsible for the coup that took him out of office temporarily. Why did they hate Hugo Chavez so much? And was Hugo Chavez this horrible dictator that the United States made him out to be?
Oil, 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 baby. Largest oil reserves in the world, next to, I think, Saudi. And yeah, I think that they are up there in the top 2 or top 3. So that's, and look, the socialism stuff, of course, you're bucking the hegemony of US capitalism. So of course we need to take out the remaining independent states or post-colonial states that do that. Hugo Chavez was the linchpin though, because we're talking about a region of the world that had been ravaged by colonialism for centuries.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you saw things change with the election of Hugo Chavez, where he came up and was democratically elected in 1999 and sparked what we now know as this pink tide. And then you got, Evo Morales, you had Rafael Correa, you had President Mujica of Uruguay. I mean, all of these things were sparked by the election of Hugo Chavez. And what Hugo Chavez did was provide a voice for the tens of millions of Venezuelans who literally were rendered invisible with the colonial powers that were controlling Venezuela for the decades prior to Chavez's election. Chavez being a more indigenous looking, coming from a poor working class background, and he uplifted those millions of people from the poor and working class areas in the barrios of Venezuela that never had a voice, Jamaro. And so these people generated this mass movement that we now know as Chavismo that is somehow sustained over the past 20 years, despite incessant US attacks, economic sanctions, destabilization campaigns. The US has paid the opposition in Venezuela $50 million over the past 10 years to try to oust the democratically elected government. Not only that, but you have John Oliver and these other progressive, so-called progressive voices spending an entire episode on Last Week Tonight gravely misinforming millions of people about the situation in Venezuela. He actually, and I give you credit for actually knowing about the 2002 coup that ousted Chavez, because John Oliver actually said there wasn't a coup and that the US has nothing to do with anything going on in Venezuela today. Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
US empire has nothing to do with that.
Business.
No coup,
I can't believe you said that.
No money being funded to the opposition, no sanctions. Oh, it's so interesting. No constant threats of regime change and military overthrow when you just had Trump and Marco Rubio saying there needs to be a military
coup. Yeah, they're calling for a coup.
Casual publications like Foreign Policy and Washington Post casually saying we need a military coup now, a violent coup, because it'll lead to democracy. It's astounding. So over the past 20 years, yes, they have continued to win in democratic elections. The elections there, and this is so funny, wow, what a crazy dictatorship to have elections every 6 months, where you have a transparent system where every vote is audited and every person has to prove their identity. Wow, I wish we had that kind of system here, where you had, first of all, you had a day off to give everyone the right to vote, to get out. Here we don't even know when the fuck elections are. Like you said, we had 20% people come out to vote for the California primary. I mean, it's a disgrace how little the engagement is.
Fuck that primary up, right? I mean,
150,000 off the ballot here in Los Angeles alone. Oh, just an accident. Don't worry about it. The provisional ballots will get counted, I'm sure. I mean, come on. And so in Venezuela today, look, I'm not going to deny that there's obviously a lot of problems with the economy. The problem that we hear is that it's basically, there's a country in mass famine, there's mass starvation, it's a totalitarian dictatorship who has, destroyed the legislative branch and destroyed all these branches of government to basically have executive power run everything. When you look at the reality, it's that the opposition is basically continues to try to take power of the government through undemocratic means. So the story starts to fall apart when you look at the facts on the ground, that there's one side who's actually pursuing democracy, which is the PSUV, the Socialist Party that has the millions of people behind them, the poor working class people who the US media actually claims are the ones who are suffering, that we need to go invade Venezuela to save. That's weird. Why are the poor people supporting this dictator who allegedly is starving them? That is very interesting. And then on top of that, this mass famine nonsense. Look, there is hunger issues for a very specific reason. There is a shortage of specific food items. There is not mass empty supermarkets of, like The Walking Dead. It is a specific shortage of items. Why? Well, when you realize that there's an economic war, and I'm not, of course there's corruption, of course there's mismanagement, of course the economy should have been diversified more off oil. All of those things are true. But that's the narrative that we always hear. What we don't hear is that there's an economic war being waged by massive corporations in the country who are also opposition members, who are also backed by the US government, who basically hoard all of these items, they sell them to Colombia, they bring pallets of cash, drive up the inflation. I mean, yada, yada, yada. But the main point is, and this is what John Oliver did that really fucking pissed me off. He showed these protesters with masks, you know, holding Molotov cocktails in the front lines of Venezuela. And he's like, they're holding back. He actually said they're fucking restrained. Jamal, as someone who got chased out of the country with a virtual lynch mob, as someone who my colleague from Telesur was shot in the fucking back from these fascists on the front lines who lynched African Americans alive. They burned them alive. That's fascist. This is disgusting. This is what's going on there. They're burning down maternity clinics. They're executing socialist candidates for the elections. And of course, there are tens of thousands of people who are marching out there. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these masked Guarimba protesters that are lauded and glorified by people like Vice and John Oliver when they were responsible for the majority of the deaths. That death toll that you saw, that was them. That was mostly them. Yes, of course, police kill people too, but you have to look at the facts. And when you look at the facts, the story quickly falls apart.
It makes sense to me that you have a socialist government and that the United States will, it's always put its thumb on those governments within South America. And in putting its thumb on its governments in South America, it is lunacy to say that the United States government wouldn't be putting money into trying to topple that government when it's been openly saying it's trying to topple the government.
Thank you.
That maniac. Yeah, I mean, they're openly saying it. The news articles are coming out with the mouthpieces are coming out with it. Donald Trump, those guys, the White House, it's not even hidden at this point. The idea that it's not even hidden. It's openly these guys saying this. The United States said, we're not going to acknowledge the election results, regardless of what the election results are. Now, that's assuming that the person win. If Maduro lost, of course, they would be like, hey, we're holding this election as being this awesome case because Maduro lost. It was this thing of we have a certain vested interest that we want to take place, and anything other than that, we're not going to qualify it as being legitimate. I always find that to be amazing. What gives us the moral standards and the moral high ground to be able to pull this off and the world to be able to go along with it? We killed 1 million people. Like that just blows me away.
At least.
You were there. What were the conversations that you were having with the people on both sides? Because I would imagine, because I looked at this as being somewhat of a class struggle.
It is.
You have just this kind of open, naked class struggle where you have one government that's somewhat of a socialist. Not saying the government is perfect or anything else. And I have my usual stance to the stuff is I don't want to take a part of it because it's none of my business. It's the same thing with Syria. It's not that I need to take the stance of loving Bashar al-Assad. I don't want my military involved in conflicts in those things. The same thing here. This idea that we need to somehow get involved in something that's taking place in Venezuela is lunacy. Why? Why do we need to have any response?
So random.
It's like random. We have everything settled here in the States. So let's go dick around in Venezuela.
So a couple of things. The election, one more thing about the election. So Maduro just won again, another election, right? He won with 4 million votes. And here's how it all worked. Like I was saying, the opposition candidates, 3 of which John Oliver points out, all 3 of them were involved in violent attempts to overthrow the democratically elected leadership of either Chavez or Maduro. In any other country, people, of course, they'd be barred from running for political office if they were involved in a coup.
It would be put in prison if they tried to.
And so John Oliver's like, oh, look at the opposition's banned from running. Actually, 2 candidates ran against Maduro. One of the guys, Falcone, his big solution was to dollarize the economy and basically beg for USAID, a known regime change tool, to come into the country and take roughshod. Great, that's going to solve everything. So people did run against him. The thing is, the opposition and the US government were working in concert to basically beg the opposition to not run a candidate. Therefore, the election would look illegitimate and undermine Maduro's victory.
Wow.
Because they knew that they would not be able to win a democratic election. So their best bet was pressuring the MUD, which is the opposition party, to not run a candidate. But what happened? 2 candidates ended up registering late. The US, there's actually headline articles, the US tried to pressure Falcone, who ended up losing to Maduro, to drop out of the race. So then they can say, look, this is a sham. Well, didn't work, and it just proved them wrong. Unfortunately, it didn't help because the US is so propagandized about the situation that they just hear a headline and they're like, well, it was a sham. I mean, if you look at the facts, it was a legitimate victory, and the US lost again.
That's amazing. I mean, it's not just them, by the way. I mean, that strategy of have you read Perkins' book?
Oh yeah, Confessions.
Economic Hitman, where he goes saying, well, they realize that they can get more bang for their buck just by paying people off, just by going to these countries and just giving cash to get what they want, saying, we're going to give you cash and you're going to do this. If not, we're going to have sharks come in and do bad things to you, either topple the government or so forth. And this was the strategy that they were using in South America.
They did it to Allende. You see Allende headlines from Allende, same thing. It's like Allende over mass starvation, shortages, all the shit. There was an economic war being waged on Allende for the exact same reasons. And we know what happened there. The CIA ultimately won. Allende, who knows what would have happened to all these countries if the CIA didn't overthrow them. And even countries like North Korea and Venezuela and all of these other, and Cuba.
Iran.
What would have happened if we left them alone?
Iran, Iraq.
All
of these countries. I mean, if you
remember
what
the world looked like today.
Yeah, when Saddam, there was a coup in Iraq where the person who took power was trying to be more egalitarian and more democratic. I can't think of his name. And the United States hated this because the question became, what is he going to do with the oil? What are you going to do with the oil? If you're getting rid of the dictator that's in head of Iraq, that dictator had certain deals with us that allowed us to get our hands on the oil. They supported the Ba'ath Party, essentially doing the same strategy that you're talking about in Venezuela, putting money in the opposition, giving loads and loads and loads of money and resources to the opposition with the idea of taking the guy out of the seat, because their concern was he's going to be more fair with the way the oil revenue is being used in the country itself. Same thing with Iran. This idea of fomenting revolution. But I mean, again, for this case of the oil, who knows what those countries would have been like if we weren't involved in those processes. That's amazing. That's amazing.
So sad to look at that. And Iran today is just, it's a shame because it's such a kind of a theocratic bent to it when, again, you just said yourself, I mean, 70 years ago, they had a democratic revolution of actually a leftist leader that immediately was overthrown. And then this Shah, this authoritarian, totalitarian, theocratic leader was put in place for 50 years where thousands of political dissidents were slaughtered in the streets. So again, we can't look at any of these countries in a vacuum. And this is the Sam Harris way of looking at the world, where you just look at data and statistics and you somehow generate an entire ideology around that. That is really problematic because you cannot look at any of these countries in a vacuum. You can't look at Iran without understanding, how did we shape Iran? What did the Sykes-Picot line, when these colonizers came in and arbitrarily drew a line, or through Korea, the 30th parallel, some asshole came in and just drew a line through a National Geographic map and somehow split up the Korean peninsula.
It also makes the point of human beings. I mean, if you slap a person, is the person not necessarily going to want to respond to the fact that you just slapped that person?
Right, exactly.
You're dropping bombs and you're murdering people. And it's like, I don't understand.
Why do they hate us?
Yeah, why do they hate us? I don't understand why they're not more peace and joy. It's like, you're murdering people. I was in Egypt for 3 weeks. And I went across Jordan, Israel, Palestine. And before I went there, I was somewhat more hawkish in regards to how I looked at the world. Within maybe the first 2 weeks, that was gone. Because I realized in this real terms way, these are just people. They're just human beings. They're just like me. It's like, this guy's like my brother, or like my uncle. That guy's like my nephew. That guy's like my aunt. These are just human beings. And when I think of the bombs and the killings and everything else, I think of the people that I met as I was traveling through. And I think to myself, that person, that's a real person that breathes, that sleeps, that have things that they love, care about, getting blown to bits by a missile or bomb that was made in the United States.
What's amazing is I never met more open generosity than I did in Palestine, of people saying, we love Americans. And I said, why? And how?
Why?
Could you possibly? Because you know why? To your point, Amar, these people have separated the atrocities conducted by our government from the people of our country. Unlike Americans who, on the other hand, actually blame all Iranians, they hate all Iraqis, they think all Palestinians are terrorists. They can't actually separate the actions of their governments from the people. But for some reason, those people, even though they've been under the bombs, they've been the ones who are the victims.
Is it because we haven't been victims? Like
yes, we externalize all of our horrors and atrocities around the world. I always say the safest place to be is inside the U.S.
Yeah,
because we're safe from U.S. bombs. Unless you want to get, unless you're an African American, and then you'll get, and then you might get executed if you walk outside by a police officer.
or you just shot or beat up in the hallway, like they just beat that guy up.
Oh God,
man,
you're
talking
people.
about aggravating.
They're sadists.
You know, there was a human rights forum. Gary Kasparov yells at Jimmy Dore. I don't know if you've seen this. Gary Kasparov yells at Jimmy Dore because Gary Kasparov at a quote unquote human rights forum, they're talking about potentially the need to go into Venezuela. Essentially, that Venezuela has been murdering people in mass, and that in murdering people in mass, there's something that needs to be done, and they need to take this to the International Criminal Court. Well, the wild part about this is Jimmy Dore got up and was like, well, wait a minute. How on earth are you justifying this in the context of the other things that we've done around the world? Gary Kasparov starts screaming at Jimmy Dore, calls him a Putin puppet. They call him a useful idiot. They're like bashing the guy at a human rights forum. It's amazing. Was it Jimmy Dore? I think
you can't make it up, man.
It was either Dore or Blumenthal. Blumenthal did something similar where Blumenthal brought up the Israeli atrocities, you know, with them killing all these people. And at that point, they got angry at him and talking about, you know, my case stands, kind of missing Blumenthal's point of.
Oh my God, what happened? I meant to send you a chat. What's going on here?
Oh
shit.
Well, let me one last question.
What did I do? Did I screw up?
No. What happened? I haven't seen the chats. Oh, you sent it to the main chat.
I accidentally pressed call. Okay, so it didn't screw up my video, right?
No.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Two last questions, and I always ask the last one. What was of all the stories that you've done? I mean, because you've been doing this for a while. What have been the stories that have given you hope, or what have been the stories that are pissed you off the most?
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the Venezuela and Palestine things piss me off the most because once you see the actual reality, it becomes so infuriating. And then you become so emboldened to just be like, holy shit. Like, it's just so crazy to come back and be inundated with the propaganda of how fake their, you know, what the misinformation is. So that probably just aggravates me the most because I know, because I was there, you know.
Seeing the reality.
In terms of what gives me hope, yeah, exactly. In terms of what gives me hope, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword because the hope comes from the despair in a lot of ways. And one of the most amazing, I think, stories was after Hurricane Harvey, a month or 2 months after, I think, I went to Houston and I went to one of the poorest neighborhoods called Lakewood. This is a neighborhood who is predominantly either African-American or undocumented immigrants. They did not see one news person, not one government official, and they were all denied FEMA aid. And these are people who are living in gutted out, molded homes. Here's the inspiring part is they have helped themselves. They saved lives. They didn't wait for someone to come around and guide them. I mean, they have taken action to rebuild their own community completely alone. And it was just the most incredibly inspirational thing. And to talk to these people who have been completely neglected by the system and for them to just be so fucking woke. Like this one guy, Wayne, was just like, why is it that we can spend our money to go kill people in another country? And he's like, and look at, we're Americans. And I was just like, you see it, man? Like, what? Where's everyone else?
Yeah. I think that comes from pain to some degree. I was telling someone else that my mom, I was in a hospital one time. My mom is riding, you know, we had just had a hurricane, and I'm bad off, extremely bad off. And she's driving to the hospital. She's listening to the radio and they're just talking about ridiculousness. And she's like, what's wrong with these people? My kid is sick. And I think what it is, it's reality. Like, it's not this fake stuff. It's my kid is sick. That's a real thing to me.
Right. And
that's a real world scenario that I have to deal with. And because it's a real world scenario that I have to deal with, this becomes more real. This other stuff becomes this kind of fake fluff.
Right. And then the most meaningful things can come out of that tragedy or suffering where suddenly life has a lot more.
It means more. All right, last question. Is there anything that you would want to tell the audience that I haven't necessarily asked you? I've kind of taken you around the bend from the standpoint of who you are versus the stories that you've done from the perspective of, you know, that you're taking within these stories and all. Is there anything else that I haven't mentioned that you might want to get across?
One quick comment. I have a podcast as well with my brother Robbie called Media Roots Radio that you can check out. Another quick plug is my partner Mike Preisner, who does the Empire Files with me, just did an epic takedown of the John Oliver piece on Venezuela. So check that out. It is absolutely eviscerates that mofo.
Please send me the link. I will put it.
I will. I totally will. But I just want to say thank you. And thank you to your audience for being critical-minded people, for thinking outside the box, for not falling prey to this tribalism in these camps. It's time that we open this dialogue and communication and try to understand where each other is coming from, because the left, cannibalizes each other. So we have to rise above that shit, man. We have to rise above this stuff and really understand that we're all on the same team. We all want the same things. Like you said, we're all human beings. We all have the same needs, and we all bleed the same. You know what I mean?
Hillary supporters don't. Hillary
supporters. They're not human.
Supporters are not the same.
The bots, the share blue bots. But no, seriously, thank you. And it starts with media literacy. It starts with understanding how to consume media and understanding where media comes from. And it all is about the grassroots people's media, right? And this is how we're going to generate the truth and fight back. Is through the narratives that we're retelling. We're retelling these lost narratives that were written by the victors and colonizers, and lifting up those marginalized voices and continuing to cut through the bullshit. And we just need to keep uplifting each other's voices and keep being that inspiration for people. And
very cool, man.
Let's keep it fighting, man. Keep fighting.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Do you have time? There's a few super chats. I always try to do a habit of reading them. They're not bad. I don't think they're bad. Trudy, clone Abby many times. Thanks for having her on, Jamal. Thank you, Abby Martin, for your service to humanity and for being here. Wesley Walker, I love the amount of F-bombs dropped already. Fucking A. Let's see. Oh, Pat Hacker, what does Abby think of Hillary's new award for changing the face of society?
Oh, God,
Well, you were a major Hillary supporter during the election, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it was part of the reason why she lost, according to the intelligence community. So, I think that everything Hillary does is terrible, and she needs to disappear in the woods forever. Why is she out there? You're not going to run for office anymore. Everyone hates you. Go home.
I have a video screaming, go away.
Put your hot sauce away. Put your Russian hat away and go home.
I have a video like I'm screaming, go away. Go away. Just go away.
That's how I feel every time I see her.
95% air. John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman is a must read. Yes, it is. I like to say thanks. Thank you. This was great. That was the last one. Abby, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Keep kicking ass, please.
Keep fighting, my friend. Thank you so much for having me on. You rock.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Peace.
All right, guys. I'm going to end this here. I want to thank Abby Martin. She is fucking awesome. Dropping another F-bomb just for the sake of dropping a fucking F-bomb. There's another one. Abby fucking Martin. That's awesome. I appreciate this. So, Abby Martin door. I'm trying, guys. I try to. I'm always putting out feelers because I try to, even if I just assume the person is going to turn me down, there's no loss at that point. And yeah, I try to reach out. So, Abby Martin, journalist, activist, just badass fucking person. Abby Martin. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys. And we are.